here in Germany. Jules, thanks very much for taking us off. My colleagues from the funding team are busy with writing lots of applications, basically. So they've asked me to cover the entire webinar, which I find grossly unfair, not just for me, but also for you, because now you are, ladies and gentlemen, stuck with a German accent for the next half an hour, which is never nice to listen to. But so be it. The ambition I have for the next half an hour to 40 minutes is to give you a brief or sort of brief actually, but very pragmatic overview for what happened in 2023 funding-wise with the key donors so far. We're going to look at the global funding trends briefly, again, looking at the outlook for some selected donors, what we can expect from them for the final quarter of 2023. And obviously, for more tailored and more specific funding advice, I'll refer you to my colleague from the funding support team on the website. They are there for you to get the funding intel that you need. Now, before we look at the donors, I'd like to point a few things out from our research. I think they need to be, they're important to be considered in the realm of looking for funding from institutions. So we've taken a lot of data since funding support started, and we found simply put that organizations with around 30% of unrestricted income, i.e. income that they themselves can allocate to whatever they feel is right, are 4 times less likely to become financially distressed. And if you turn that conclusion around, you can argue that if your organization is, 75% plus or 70% plus funded by donors who restrict the income in use, the risk of never having enough money for the core goes up substantially. The common picture here is that the NGO becomes a bit of a donut, where the middle part, that is, innovation, experimentation, training for staff, hiring and building good systems and processes, the stuff that is not project expenses, that gets hollowed out. And so the organization starts looking like a donut. The flip side of that is that we've also looked at our partner NGOs over the last 8-9 years, and we found that those NGOs which managed to grow mature existing donors by around about 15 to 20%, around 15% per year. So this goes the old adage, retention is better than acquiring new supporters. But not just having the donor, but continuing to engage with the institutional donor as well, and achieving a 15% growth rate year on year, on average, not in every year. That tends to speak of a very active business development capacity within the team and resulting in the organization growing, at least financially growing. Similarly, we find that NGOs which continually grow manage on average, out of the 300 or so partners we support, around 2 to add 2 new donors per year. There might be very little, but there are new donors nonetheless. So this could be an indication to you saying if we are not managing that sort of level, or if we are well above that level, then we are probably all right, or we should do something about this. What the NGOs that grow have in common, unsurprisingly, is we looked at their investments. What do they spend on business development, opportunity identification, donor intelligence, writing good concept notes, writing very good budget notes, these post-mortems on the proposals, training their staff. In short, those NGOs which invest into business development, they tend to grow faster as well. Makes sense, sounds intuitively right. We weren't surprised to learn that. So with that in mind, and these things apply to sort of everything, let's start having a look at the key donors that there are around the world. We're looking at the EU, the US, the Germans, a couple of UN agencies as well. We have not included the Nordic donors this quarter. We've had them in our last quarterly funding update because there was less updates there, and we're basically running out of time in this webinar. Good. As my colleague mentioned to you, these slides will be shared with you afterwards, so you don't need to manically write everything down. If you are finding any of these tips and recommendations and our research results useful, such as those ones here, which I don't want to mention right now because we're running out of time otherwise, then do please be in touch. More than happy to engage in a conversation. Good. So let's have a look at the major donor agencies and what happened over the summer and so far this year. Overall, the trend towards an increase in ODA, in overseas development assistance, is continuing. As you know from the last quarterly update, 2022 was an absolute record year, but that increase, that increase in funding was mostly be done by the COVID and the Ukrainian response. The top funding themes for 2023, therefore, have continued to be health, but this time surpassed by infrastructure. And we expect infrastructure and economic support to continue growing quite heavily over the next year. You can probably imagine why. Health continues to be a growing, double-digitally growing area of donor interest, as does inclusive development, education, I'm pleased to report, and agriculture. The latter two in particular by the European Union and Germany. We'll look into that later. So the top trends for this year continue almost like last year's. Obviously, the climate change response continues. The EU is only getting started with its global gateway policy that has a very clear climate footprint and a very clear climate orientation. Gender issues continue to grow as well. So gender issues is a wide term. You could include a lot of things in that, but we had to categorize it somehow. Localization is a top priority, particular for USAID. So USAID, I think it's fair to say, is leading the trend and leading the charge towards localization right now, investing heavily here in making sure that their funding devolves to more localized implementers, not having an awful lot of success just yet, but certainly growing. We'll look into USAID data as well. And then there is what we have themed, for want of a better word, private sector collaboration. That is a trend since 2022 that has made it to the top 4, top 5. And what we mean with that is that both the major institutional as well as large foundations are almost demanding that nearly all non-humanitarian funding has now a private sector angle, a private sector collaboration included. And that is nothing new. If you, for example, British, differed in the old days, has been very keen around that as well, but that trend is coming back. What we've also noticed, that might be interesting to hear, is that the timeline for proposal submission is becoming even shorter. I think that one of the reasons is that all donor agencies, but particularly USAID, is experiencing massive staff shortages. So they are just taking a long more time to get the grants and get the call proposals out. And they are trying to save some time by making the timelines for proposal submissions even tighter. That doesn't really help us. That doesn't really help the donor either. And most importantly, I don't think it's a particularly good practice for the people who the aid is intended for the users and the beneficiaries. But it's a fact of life that we used to see an average response rate of over 40 days, and we are now in the mid-30s, and we continue that time squeeze to continue. We expect that time squeeze to continue. Those trends more or less affect all donors. Let's have a look at how we respond to that. In terms of fundraising, so just to be clear, fundraising is the non-institutional one. Fundraising obviously has changed massively since the COVID days. And these changes seem to have lasted, although that personalized outreach, particularly via digitalized trends, is now expected. So what used to be 3-4 years ago used to be the gold standard to send personal appeals via a good working customer relationship management software or donor-based software has now become the standard, and most private donors and small donors in Europe, in the UK, and in the US particularly, are expecting a semi-personalized approach driven by ever better segmentation of the donor base. Again, donor retention beats donor acquisition. We've measured with our NGO partners the cost of acquiring a new small-scale supporter to retaining it. And we found that, unsurprisingly, the costs of retaining or even resurrecting a small donor is about 3 times less than acquiring a new one. So we have seen more and more fundraising schemes that have basically operated like a pyramid scheme, where they're trying to acquire ever more supporters, but at the same time, they're losing lots of which they have previously convinced. So my recommendation would be to look at retention first and acquisition second. I'm going to jump to the small one. We do expect smaller donations as the recession isn't going away anytime soon. The UK, Germany, and France are struggling financially. The inflation is diminishing, but not as fast as we were all hoping. So we are expecting the economic tough times to have an impact on donations for the foreseeable future. However, personal giving in the UK and in the US is actually still quite good. So maybe there's a delayed effect. Okay, let's get back to the institutional ones. We're starting with the single world's largest donor, USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. We're starting with the tips here first. Analyzing the failure rate at USAID, we found, together with our colleagues at USAID, that the programmatic and geographic focus of many proposals just hasn't been right. So proposals are sometimes submitted, or quite frequently submitted, to USAID, where even the geography isn't exactly what it said on the TORs. And they are a semi-automatic immediate rejection. So that's why we put it in the number 1. If you submit to USAID, please make sure that your program and your geography actually matches the call proposal. I know it sounds like a very obvious thing, yet we see many proposals that don't. Things move really fast there, particularly after the summer. We definitely require to monitor opportunities coming out of USAID on a weekly, if you can, even better, daily basis. Remember that the average response time is getting shorter and shorter. So if you lose a week identifying a new opportunity, and that's a lot of time lost. If you don't have that capacity to monitor on a very frequent basis, then obviously you can build it or buy it in. In order to become ready for USAID, there's entire programs out there. You can search for checklists, you can ask consultants, but there are some useful considerations involving program design, compliance, HR, program management, budget, and finance. All of these things need to demonstrate at the first proposal that the organization is not only in full compliance, but can actually perform the work to USAID standards. That is more rigorously controlled. I would even say that it is much better to be overly ready for your first USAID grant than trying to wing it on the first one. So if you have a USAID strategy and you're not quite there yet, I would invest into that capacity. The better you can demonstrate that at your first few proposals, the more likely your proposal will succeed. Pragmatically, there is a website called workwithusaid.org. It's part of their localization channel. We put the link in here to the presentation. Work with USAID is specifically designed web portal to attract smaller, mid-sized, and local implementers. Anybody can create an account there. Going through the website is a bit painful. It does take a lot of time. If you're just doing it for one organization, for yourself, I get it why this might not be a enjoyable task. However, I would focus to monitor at least the large calls. I would also recommend to join the quarterly business forecasts or just join these webinars where we take much information from that as well, and approach the key contractors and awardees for subcontracting here. I think that might help. make sure that if you are not a USAID direct contractor yet, that you need to, at some point, undergo the, sorry. There we go. I've completely messed up here. Undergo the NICRA trend, and the NICRA application is something to do. Let's have a look at 2024 then. Having said all that, USAID manages now 63 billion, round about 32 billion through USAID, the rest through state. That is a 10% increase, so quite a major increase in 2024, again, driven a lot by continued investments in health, migration response, and the Ukrainian war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. A lot of it goes to multilateral organizations, contractors, and the 10 large INGOs. Hence my earlier comment, if you're not a contractor yet, maybe you can become a partner to these major players on USAID. That strategy that I mentioned with earlier with work with USAID is gaining speed. It should have really been up and running 2 years ago, but it's slowly getting there. So I would expect a lot more to be pushed to mid-sized and local implementing agencies here. The thematic focus has changed ever so slightly in the priority list on the right. It continues to be humanitarian assistance and food security, strengthening democracies and developing economies, which is basically large-scale livelihood projects, has now taken slightly more funding than improved global health, basically. And they've coined a term called global health security, but it's basically health programming. After health has spiked during the COVID response, that has now slightly dropped again. Gender, again, very heavily on the USAID mind. Bear in mind as well that USAID is introducing or is about to introduce gender audits to all their major contracts. So as part of the compliance, you may be required very soon to perform or to show that you have performed the gender audit. And of course, assistance to the Ukraine continues. There we are. Let's move on to the UK. The United Kingdom has, a lot of people are complaining about the Foreign Development Commonwealth and Development Office, but I think we have to bear in mind that the UK is still one of the world's biggest donor. Yes, we have seen massive budget cuts. So FCDO is now managing the numbers you're seeing here, which marks around about a 500 million decrease in funding compared to 2021. The UK is now falling short of its promise to spend 0.7% of its GDP on ODA. That shortfall and that decline is very likely to continue as a fact. The COVID response has given a slight relief in the statistics to that, in that it's slightly increased during that in the health sector, but overall we do not see UK institutional funding increasing for the next 4 or 5 years, frankly. So if you are starting a donor fundraising strategy, I probably wouldn't start with the UK for now, but I wouldn't completely forget about it either, because it's still one of the biggest donors, and we've been there before in the early noughties and in the mid-90s, where the UK has dipped, and then half a decade later they have been the top one again, or one of the top again. The themes, interestingly enough, continue to be education, again, gender, poverty reduction or economic strengthening. And then there is the new CSSF fund, which is a large framework fund, as some of you know, which you may be a member of. What's also good to know is that whilst the UK funding isn't very large, it has replenished to some degree its Innovation Fund for Impact and its Small Charities Challenge Fund. So these two funds go through a faster approval process. You can apply at any time. They are pretty formless to do. Obviously, you need to have some real innovation to show. And we do expect extremely fierce competition for UK funding there. Hopefully that helps. The EU is having a super year. as you know, is key focus between now and 2024 is democracy support, or what they call protecting citizens and freedoms, economic growth, climate neutral green fair and a social Europe, and promoting EU interests on a global stage, which is a mouthful, but basically shows, you know, all that support to arts, liberal democracy, education as well. There's in true EU fashion, the EU operates a large number of programs, and it's quite easy to get lost in the funding opportunities. The website isn't straightforward. They're doing their best, I'm sure. Some programs are well known and widely recognized. You know, many of you will have known Horizon or EU for Health, but there's a ton of other ones that are regularly overlooked. The EU representatives we speak to are aware of this problem, but doing something about that is not going to happen anytime soon. So I hope that these selected funds here, I'm not going to read them out right now so that we get to the questions very soon, can give you an idea. They are all linked when you get them. Look at programs like the Cohesion Fund, obviously the Neighborhood Fund, if you are looking for programs in the EU neighborhood. There is the largest one of those, and these links hopefully help you, give you an idea about where to look. If you're really struggling, then please do reach out to my colleagues, and we will happily send you the links if we can find them quickly as well. Many of you know that the EU's main agency has been renamed DG INTPA right now, carrying out a large number of initiatives, funding a lot of programs in support of the SDGs. We've all seen the report last week on the SDGs. That's not looking too good. INPA is on track to become that major portion spender, the major agency for the EU aid spending, around about 15 billion now worth annually, continuing to grow nicely. A third of it happens to be spent on infrastructure and economic support, just about over a quarter on human rights, democracy, and peace. That's a large block. Around the same on budget support to host governments and development initiatives, safety net initiatives, and around just under 20% on climate. The climate funds at the moment focus a lot on natural resource management. We are expecting that climate funding to be approaching 25% by the end of next year or so. Hopefully that helps a little bit, and if your programs fall into any of these categories, you should definitely scour through the websites of INPA there. ECHO, as you know, or as many of you know, is the EU's agency for humanitarian assistance. It spends a lot of money on humanitarian work, as it should do. You do, however, need to have a partnership agreement with ECHO. That is quite a comprehensive application process. It's not necessarily complicated, but it takes a lot of time. If you are a DG ECHO partner, once you've gone through that process and a certificate of partnership is then granted, then your organization is eligible to apply for funding under humanitarian actions within these established rules and procedures there. So a bit of a barrier there for first-time implementers. However, I wouldn't shy away from doing that too much. As I said, becoming an ECHO partner is not just a good label to have, but it's not massively complicated either. It just takes a lot of time, and you might find that your processes and your procedures as an organization might actually improve in the process of undergoing the application. Again, if you need help, please reach out to my colleague there who is supporting a lot of people on the application process. It is not rocket science. This has to be done. Good. Quickly moving on to the Germans. Now, as I've said before, and as my colleagues have said before in these quarterly funding updates, German funding is distributed amongst the various agencies, one of them being, probably the best known, being the GIZ. The current government treaty runs to 2025, and it lists these 5 areas as the key priorities. Health here is the #1 priority, pandemic preparedness as well. So there's the wonderful German optimism that we all know a pandemic is coming back at some point, so we want to be better prepared. I'm not sure I can face another one. Gender, again, is on their high on their agenda list, as well as education, food security, and of course, climate mitigation and adaptation. Notice on the climate mitigation adaptation part that German funding is not just in GIZ, ever more talking about mitigating the effects of climate change, adapting to the climate change, rather than trying to avoid climate change, stemming from a realization that for many parts of climate change, it's definitely too late. Whatever we do, we are facing significant climate change challenges over the next 50 years. Signature programs here, just to give you a few ideas, the BMZ is having a new initiative, One World No Hunger, around about 600 million in 2022. It faced some implementation delays, and it's focusing on agriculture and food security. I would, if you're in that space, definitely look into this. Flight and migration continues to be a initiative also by BMZ, with the tagline, tackling the root causes of displacement. That results in a lot of economic strengthening programs, and of course, the climate change and renewable energy agenda, where we have a pledge of around 1.5 billion euros to the Green Climate Fund. There will be direct bilateral programs coming out later this quarter as well. So here I would check the BMZ and the GIZ. Hope that helps in terms of a larger picture. Overall, we have a large number of projects with the GIZ. We've inserted the links and a few upcoming calls down there. Just to pick one example, the GIZ continues to stay true to its focus on TVET, technical vocational training. So by the 27th of September, you see a vocational training education in the healthcare sector, Ethiopia being due, or we have organizing exposure visits in terms of technical manuals of GRC projects due. That's also happening this month. So there's a lot of applications. The links are in there. Please, the applications to GIZ are, relatively straightforward. The website is a bit smaller to navigate than the EU's, and the links are in there. We hope that you find that useful. Coming to the close with the UN agencies, UNHCR has changed its strategy towards the end of 2022, and it's now becoming a bit of a reality. They continue to focus on that 3C approach, conflict, climate, COVID. They are tackling a huge backlog of cases in terms of stranded persons and refugee programming. So they are doing some strategic shifts that are slowly but surely becoming reality, particularly in terms of their digitalization drive and their Ukraine focus. If you are an organization working in that space, and if you can assist UNHCR, this is why we've included it here, and if you are relatively digitalized, and I'm sure that our friends and colleagues in Geneva would like to hear from you on this, if you have a solution to present. And finally, UNICEF, a large UN-affiliated NGO, as you all know, they've also launched their new strategic framework in last year, looking more on recovery strategy and transformative systems change. If you are a UNICEF implementer partner, then I would strongly advise that you take a quick look at that public strategy, as well as the 2 calls we've linked here at the bottom, and focus your applications, particularly on, again, a digitalization trend that UNICEF is now picking up on in order to manage more with dwindling funds. So I appreciate that I said something about a lot of donors, and all of it, a lot of it very deep. I do, that is owed to the time that I've been given, which is about half an hour, which is exactly now, I believe, Jules. so that we have 15 to half minutes to 30 minutes for any questions and answers. And in terms of getting more information on a specific donor or for your organization, please check up the funding support, where you can also contact us, of course, to gain more donor intelligence. And then I think, Jules, you got a couple of announcements. Is that right?
Yes, Chris, thank you so much. Thank you for all that amazing information.
It's kind of a mouthful, all that, you know, it's a lot squeezed into a half an hour.
Yes, it is. And if anyone has any questions, please do put them in the question and answer box and not in the chat. Just information, we have our amazing in-person training courses back in action. We have 3 available and we have different locations around the world. Please do log on to our website and take a look at the courses, register and sign up. The courses promise to be very full of information and will really benefit your organization. So please join us. Register on our website. You can see on our page /training courses, and all the information is there.
Sure.
And then our next webinar is on Monday. Actually, we postponed this one a little bit before, so please do join us on Monday between 3:30 and 4:30. 5 tips to secure commercial contracts. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you, Chris.
Great.
Are you ready to handle some questions?
Let's do it.
Right. So our first question from an anonymous attendee: what are the best tips for getting advanced business intelligence for USAID?
Okay, so USAID is what I would rate as it's a great question, by the way, so I'm not sure why you're saying anonymous. USAID is probably one of the half-transparent donors. The quarterly business updates are about the similar form to what we've just done. They are obviously USAID specific, but they are looking at the large-scale trends, and they're providing you with information about what they're looking to do so. What also really helps is checking out with workwithusaid.gov. The link is in the presentation that Jules will send to you. And finally, there's a ton of events, not just in Washington, but elsewhere as well, where many of my colleagues do pick up lots of intelligence almost every week. And if you do not have the capacities to do that, just ask your funding officer, or feel free to reach out to us so that you can get early intelligence in order to prepare your bids there.
Great, thank you, Chris. Marina has asked us, which countries are currently providing the most funding opportunities for smaller charities?
Marina, I think, I don't know is the answer to that particular question, which country. I've never separated it by country. I know that the localization agenda for USAID is gaining speed. However, in the contracting side, it is still very difficult to contract with USAID with a very small organization. So I would more look into the theme. We have seen a massive spike in local responders and local implementers in the health and in the migration area, as well as in the humanitarian sector, from all donors, by the way. ECHO on the humanitarian side is reasonably good at partnering with mid-sized and smaller organizations. If you're very small, however, your most practical way of getting into the game and obtaining funding and doing what you do best is partnering with one of the major implementers. So my pragmatic tip is, like I said in the webinar, take the largest implementers that are public, or you can ask us, and say, can we sub to these implementers? A large proportion of USAID funding, for example, goes to a handful of 10 NGOs and development contractors. That may be a good way to then graduate up to become a prime one day.
Great, thank you. Another anonymous question. What kind of projects are you referring to when talking about the infrastructure in the humanitarian sector in Europe?
Okay, so I'm not talking about infrastructure in humanitarian sector. Infrastructure, infrastructure is a major funding area for all donors, not just the EU. But there are infrastructure projects, road, streets, airports, harbors, food storage solutions are quite popular these days, and a lot of being done in Eastern Africa, for example. The fact that they consume so much funding shouldn't give you the impression that there is lots and lots of projects, because infrastructure projects tend to be quite expensive. So you reach higher numbers quite fast. And that's why it's always on the top 3 there. In the infrastructure projects are usually not of interest to NGOs, but bear in mind that in an infrastructure grant or in an infrastructure project, there are lots of local engagements. So what we have seen, for example, is food storage building or agricultural infrastructure funded projects by the EU in, for example, Ethiopia, and then a significant part of what is built as an infrastructure project goes to NGOs to work with the local population, avoid land grabbing, reduce and avoid corruption, so oversight and things like that. This is where the donor intelligence comes in important again. So don't dismiss, if you're in that area, don't dismiss the whole grant opportunity just because it has a word infrastructure in it.
Great, thank you, Chris. Lindsay has asked, not an institutional donor, but do you have any intel about the changes at OSF, the Open Society Foundations?
No, I don't. It's a short answer. They are a huge donor, of course, and they have undergone massive change over the last few months. I think there is a bit of a decoupling or an opening up away and beyond George Soros. But I would be very surprised if their focus is going away from equity, media expression, justice. So I think they're going to continue to be committed to what they define as being the open society.
Great, thank you, Chris.
Can't discuss any further.
Kamar has asked for USAID. Do we have any bifurcation that how much among and number of projects have been awarded to NGOs?
Yeah, sure. Bifurcation is a bit of a wordful. Kamar, absolutely. You can go to the USAID business forecast, download the Excel spreadsheet on awards 2023. I think in the last funding upgrade in May, we went a little bit deeper into this. So you could even look at the recording from the MZN webinar there. And you can see the number of grants that they are looking to push out. In the last funding upgrade there, we have said that USAID is massively committed to funding a lot more this year. And given it's now September, we expect it to be a very busy 3 months. So if you are available and if you have a profile that is attractive to USAID, I would definitely monitor them very closely over the next 2 or 3 months, because they are in a pickle with the staff shortages. They didn't get as much funding out in the summer and in the run up to the summer this year. So they have to pick up the pace now. Does that make sense?
Thanks, Chris. Matthew has sent us a question. It was mentioned that about half of the USG funding is under debt of state. Yep. Might that be because of the US embassies and most embassy staff are under the debt of state budget? Or put another way, they might not have that much funding available for implementing organizations.
Yeah, so the figures presented here obviously meet the definition of ODA, Overseas Development Assistance. That includes ODA provided by embassies. It doesn't include the budget for the embassies, them and of themselves. So, yeah, you're right. The figures have been vetted so far that it doesn't just include the embassy budget. That would be ridiculous. But obviously, the ODA part of what the embassy can directly contract is included. So yes and yes, yes and no.
Great, thanks, Chris. Could you please clarify if non-German based NGOs are eligible for direct funding from BMZ?
Yeah, sure. Any European ones. Full stop.
Great. Perfect.
It's very easy. Any European entity is eligible for any donor in the EU. It's a simple that is integrated. It might still make sense to get a German partner for various reasons, but if your entity is in the EU, then you can apply for BMZ, GIZ, Austrian Development Agency funding. That's the legality of it. You still need to build relationships with them. That's the pragmatic side.
Great, thank you. What are the best strategies for donor retention?
Oh gosh. So donor retention we mentioned in this webinar as part of the fundraising strategy. And it's a huge topic that lots of our partners are investing significant time and money into. Basically on having realized what we all think is intuitively right anyway, in that donor retention is not only cheaper, but also better than acquiring a constant stream of new donors. If we're talking about institutional donors, then we are always advising our clients after the second or third grant to involve the donor as much as possible in new initiatives thinking. Even in the middle of the grant, in the middle of the implementation period, engage with the donor on a technical level about what can be innovated, what can be changed. If they are undergoing a change process, as many donors do, participate, offer help, provide insight. All that is free work for them, of course. I get that, which is causing you can only fund that work if you have sufficient unrestricted. But that constant engagement with the donors retains them. And similar for the individual fundraisers, but I presume your question was focused on institutional.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Just following on from the question we had before, what about BMZ for NGOs outside the EU, e.g. in the UK?
So particularly for the UK, but it doesn't really matter. The access for non-EU organizations to EU donors is severely restricted. That's just a fact. So we get that question a lot. However, on Horizons, for example, the EU program, so the answer isn't absolutely not. We have certain programs within the EU, certain programs within BMZ that are open to third member states, so non-member states. So an example here would be the Horizon program from the European Union, for example, which anybody globally can apply for and implement something for. But the fact of the matter is that the majority of grant and humanitarian funding in Europe and in the European member states is limited to European members organizations.
Great, thanks, Chris. We have quite a few more questions, 11 questions, and I think we have 5 or 10 more minutes left.
Yeah, we had some in advance as well, didn't we?
We did have some in advance as well.
I was really trying to get through this massive slide deck as fast as possible in order to provide more time. So let's try.
All right, we're going to try and get through as many of these as we can. Please, I'll read out the faster answer questions as best, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, sure.
Are the funding opportunities for organizations based? What are the funding opportunities based in Central West Africa?
Okay, do your mapping. Sorry, it's the fast answer. I'm trying to speed up here. Central West Africa is no longer a priority zone for some of the European Union funding that has been prioritized as part of Team Europe approach. However, funding, significant amount of fundings are still going from the EU to Central and to West Africa. Direct bilateral funding is going to there, particular from France. So we can't list out every funding opportunities in this update, but if you do a proper donor mapping, you will find donors, whether they are in your thematic area. I don't know. We would need to speak directly.
Great, thanks, Chris. What would be the best approach to engage with the German government donors? Note, NGOs not registered in Germany.
So in reference to my earlier answer, I'm assuming that you're an organization that is eligible for funding from European organizations, including Germany. If that is the case, engaging with them is absolutely essential. You can engage them on a technical level through the NGO associations, for example. FENRO is very good on that. There's a couple of conferences happening next month, on the 10th and the 11th of October. There's the Humanitarian Congress. There is the, on the same day, there's the Congress for Development Cooperation, both in Berlin. All the donor agencies are going to be there. Then there is the EU conference, the European Development Days. I can't remember when they are, Jules, you might be able to help me. I think they used to be in March or May in Brussels every year or something like that. So that's a staple conference I would definitely go to. Finally, of course, I would join the GIZ events. I would also join the technical working groups happening in Frankfurt, Bonn, and Berlin. Now, the trick is to turn this technical cooperation into a funding relation. And that doesn't just happen by engaging with them over years and years on the technical side. And this needs to be managed. But it probably exceeds the limits of this webinar to go into that anymore. Hopefully these conferences will help you a little bit.
Great, thanks, Chris. Alex has just asked a similar line of questioning. Do you need to be an American NGO to have access to USAID? Equal opportunities for EU organizations?
Equal opportunities. So yes, USAID has a flaw in its localization logic in that the contracting terms and conditions often require a US-based entity. They're looking to change that because they are, really investing into localization, and I expect that to be increasingly untied. Certain USAID funds, much like certain EU funds, for example, and EU member state funds, are what we call untied. So untied to national presence in the jurisdiction, in this case, the US or the EU. But that is still the minority. So in order to obtain US funding consistently, you probably need a US entity. I just want to mention, this is the third or fourth question of can we apply for funding as a foreign organization to this donor? I just don't want to make sure that we all are bearing in mind that eligibility is one thing, actually engaging and writing good concept notes to them and really being up to date with the latest developments at the donor and in the field, more importantly, is a way bigger success factor than the eligibility. The eligibility we can somehow work around. We can find a US partner, we can go through a development contractor. If they want to find a way to fund you because you have something innovative and close to do and you can deliver real impact, then we're going to find a way to make that happen in terms of eligibility. But we have to be clear that, as I said in the webinar, that not just the basic requirements of the donor, of the proposal are met, so the thematic and the geographic focus, but that the project is clear, to the point, prevents value for money, and can actually have an impact. If that is happening, we'll find a way. Sorry, it was a bit of a monologue.
Great, thanks, Chris. I'm just going to that email that Wendy sent us and with her 10 questions, and I'm going to try and get through one or two of them.
Yeah, I've got it in front of me, actually.
Okay. Well, the first one is organizing intelligence is an increasing problem. Yes. Donors are far from giving feedback, are more difficult to reach, partly due to unstable areas or just too busy in Europe. Do you have any advice for this?
First of all, Wendy, thanks for, I hope you're joining. Is Wendy on the attendee list? Otherwise, I'm speaking into the void. It's a good question for all of us, though. How do we actually engage with donors and how do we get intelligence from them? this is a major challenge, particular to organizations which are busy implementing projects and are busy helping those we really want to help, our beneficiaries, our aid users. In many ways, that is the reason we started funding support, because engaging with donors for one organization with one donor is just a hugely costly and time-intensive exercise. It's better to do this on behalf of our NGO partners, just by the background. That's why we've done it in this way, for funding support to do that for you. But in a nutshell, the technical cooperation I've mentioned earlier really helps. The various events, the various working groups. There's a working group happening now almost every other week. I would imagine that your organization should definitely join in on a technical level to those areas where you have expertise. Contribute to them, and hear what they have to say. That technical cooperation can happen at working groups, at the events, at the conferences, as well as the online forum these days. So for example, the KfW online forum is pretty good on talking about the technical final details of impact finance in this case. What we have done with some of our funding support clients as well is we've gone the extra length of developing signature programs, and we wanted to check if they are receiving good markings. So what we have done is develop trial concept notes. Concept note about 5 to 10 pages, not that much work. We can do one in a couple of days, even with AI. We've sent those with a ridiculous proposal, a ridiculous price tag, knowing it would be rejected, but we would then get that technical mark back. So they go through a technical evaluation and get some comments back. It's a bit of a workaround. Submitting a proposal or submitting a concept note, is going to be rejected just to get the technical feedback from the donor. But that is something we've done before, and that has helped, particularly if you're working on a new host of programs and you want to get it right. And very last but not least, it's the personal contact. So a lot of my colleagues quite simply call their former colleagues at the donor, ask, what is the current thinking about this and that? And at the in-house events at GIZ or the EU, I sometimes just go around saying, hey, one of our NGOs is thinking about doing this and that. What do you think? And it sounds very informal, but it's part of the best conversations I have.
Great, thanks, Chris. Wendy's second question is very interesting about artificial intelligence. And I just want to let everyone here know that we will be hosting a webinar on artificial intelligence going forward within the next few months, and some ideas and things around that. I think we have time just for one more question. I don't know, Chris, do you have any that you would like to select?
Would you like me to address the artificial intelligence question?
You're welcome to, but we will be...
I thought you... So look, we've been using AI, ChatGPT, and various specialized AI modules for the last 3-4 months, and I'm super impressed of how much better they get. But they are, in our experience so far, in the internal conversations, producing about a proposal a day for our various partners, they are great at speeding up the back end. And taking your very good notes and developing a better and better sounding coherent text out of it. So in short, I think they speed up the process of getting from bullet points to a ready proposal that you can copy and paste in the relevant form. What they don't do is being very good content-wise. In fact, we have to be aware of AI hallucination. They sound very credible and sometimes not true. So the prompt that we are entering into these various tools, ChatGPT, Granted, and all the other ones, have to be very, very good. I would use the AI tools where you can upload a document rather than copy paste it into the text box. That makes it a lot easier. But they have to be very specific. They have to be very clear, and then ask them to specifically ask them to consider all the points in there and produce the various graphics and the various flowcharts and the various argument that is in there. So I think that back end is better. It saves basically the middle part, saying to get from a copy note from a bullet point list to a finalized proposal. That really speeds up, and I'm absolutely amazed by what it's doing. That is great. That saves us a couple of days. But the majority part of the proposal is developing the milestone plan, is developing the project, making sure you have a convincing theory of change, making sure that you can actually provide impact, making sure that you have a convincing and very good value for money process. And to do that content-wise, I wouldn't trust, I don't trust the AI just yet to do it. It all sounds very convincing, but it's often comes across as convincing, but substance in this cliches and narratives that are coming out. So basically, it's a very good copywriter, put it this way.
Great, thank you, Chris. Afraid we are out of time. I know we have at least 10 open questions, and we still have a number of questions from Wendy's email. I am sorry to everyone, but time is running. So thank you so much, Chris, for all of your insights. That was
just a very quick question. Do we have the email addresses of everybody whose question is not answered? And can we maybe provide an email?
If you have the question and you feel it is unanswered, please do email us.
Yes, that's also the
question. I do have a copy of all the questions, but it is not linked to an email. It's linked to a name or an anonymous attendee.
Okay, because we are so many here, and because we've discussed so much, may I then mirror my colleague Jules in saying, if you have any other questions, our mission is to build better and stronger NGOs. So if you have any questions that we couldn't get to in this hour, please email, we definitely reply.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you to everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.